Welcome back, guys. We have another exciting video for you today. This is essentially going to be a part 2 for the 5 insane sneaker ad VFX tricks video. In this video, I 3D scanned a shoe, and then I pretty much just showed you how you can use simple free 3D softwares like Blender to create different effects, to create different shoe commercial-esque things. We're going to take it one step further here, and I want to dive into augmented reality fashion. And this is something that I think in the future we're going to see a lot more. I think it's super important to talk about these skill sets that are going to benefit you in the future. If you learn how to do things like augmented reality, like 3D, paying attention to the direction we are moving in. If you get into the tech, if you get into the know-how early, you can make a lot of money, build a name for yourself, create amazing things in the long run. So I got my little spiel out of the way. Now we're going to talk about inspiration for what we're going to be building. Let's talk about Artifact Studios here. And of course, I'll leave their Instagram down below. But let me just show you some of the things that they produce here, mixing 3D with real life. And before we do that, a quick word from the sponsor of today's video, the Brevity Jumper Backpack. When it comes to hauling around expensive and heavy gear to different shoot locations, I feel like it's important to invest in a quality camera backpack. Recently, I was sent this pine green Brevity Jumper Backpack. First impressions, the quality is top notch. There's an arrangement of different colors that you can pick from their site, sleek design. Quick rundown on the backpack, features interchangeable Velcro pockets, so you can change around the layout of the actual camera portion to your liking depending on the gear that you are using. There's a quick access zipper on the side, so you can open that to quickly grab your camera or a second lens. In the front pouch, there's space and different accessible pockets for important items. In the top zipper, you can also fit a small laptop. If you guys remove all the Velcro dividers, you can use it as a normal backpack and fit larger items. And probably one of my favorite features, they have a secret zipper where you can stash your phone or your wallet. If you guys are interested, click the link at the top of my description and use code MAXNOVAK at checkout to get 10% off your Brevity backpack. I've been a long-time fan of what they do, mixing the streetwear sneaker culture with 3D, with technology. And these guys have been making a killing. Pretty sure they raised millions of dollars for this Artifact Studio, and I'm pretty sure they've sold millions of dollars worth of NFTs. So if you want to do a deep dive on them, again, check out their Instagram. We're going to be talking about how to create something like this, where we take a 3D shoe, give it this sci-fi element, and then do some screen replacement work here to create a cool video like this, where you're changing the color, you can swipe through, you can build on this in so many different ways. So that's all I have to say on that. Again, this is another beautiful one with the graphics card spinning, similar to what we're going to do in my tutorial. So let's get started and talk about what you guys are going to need to actually recreate what I showed you at the beginning. So you're going to need a 3D software, and it doesn't really matter which one. I'm going to be using a mixture of Cinema 4D and Blender. This is a more intermediate tutorial, so it's good to have some basic knowledge before starting this. So in my case, I'm going to use After Effects and Cinema 4D to do all of the tracking and the designing of the assets. And I'm also going to use Blender, which is again free, to do some basic 3D modeling to make my shoe look a little more sci-fi-esque. Now, in terms of the assets, again, in my 5 sneaker videos, I talked about 3D scanning any shoe that you may own. If you are interested in that, again, a link below to this. If you don't want to go through all the trouble of 3D scanning a shoe, you can literally just look up free 3D shoe model. I guarantee you're going to find tons of these, any shoe that you want that you can start with. And then the third option is, of course, to 3D model your own shoe. This takes the longest, but you'll probably have the coolest results if you're going for some unique sci-fi look. So just look up how to 3D model a shoe. Watching or browsing through one of these will also give you some good knowledge once we do get to the customizing part. I'll leave the link below to the graphics card model that I downloaded for free. So credit to Dima SP on Sketchfab for that. Once you've gathered all of your assets, we're going to start off by tracking our 3D shoe model into the footage that I shot. If you guys want, I'll leave the footage that I use down below if you'd like to use mine and follow along. So again, I'm using After Effects and C4D to do all the tracking and modeling. If you don't want to use After Effects, if you don't want to use C4D, you can just use Blender's built-in tracking system. And we'll talk about that near the end of the tutorial as well. So once you have your footage in After Effects, right click on it, track and stabilize, and then you want to click track camera. Go ahead and let After Effects do its thing. Once you have your track all ready to go, you're going to see all this tracking data, and if you hover over it, you're going to see this bullseye allowing you to select different parts of the scene. So we're going to select a flat part of the ground here where I'd like to place my 3D shoe, and I'm going to right click and click Create Solid in Camera. I'm going to select that track solid layer that we just created and just slightly scale that up. And now I'm ready to bring this scene into Cinema 4D and drop my 3D shoe onto that track solid area that we just marked out. So go up to File, Export, and select the Maxon Cinema 4D exporter. Now all you have to do is navigate to wherever you just saved that C4D project file export and just double click on it to open it up in C4D. All right guys, in Cinema 4D, if you go over in the top right, you're gonna see your 3D camera tracker, which we set up in AE, and the track solid. If you just click off of the 3D camera tracker, zoom out a bit, you can see the exact camera motion from whenever I recorded my footage. All we really need to do is drop a 3D model onto that track solid. The track solid is essentially just a placeholder for where we need to put things in 3D space so that it matches our footage. So I'm going to go up to File, Merge Objects, and I'm going to grab the 3D shoe scan that I set up in the previous tutorial. And again, we talked about gathering your assets at the beginning. If you don't want to 3D scan your shoe, you guys can use any model that you'd like to track into your scene. So I'm just going to place that over top of my track solid. When I go back into the camera view, you'll see how my shoe is tracked perfectly with my camera. So let's file save this and hop back into After Effects. And the cool thing about the After Effects in C4D workflow, you can literally drag in the C4D project file into After Effects as a layer. It's going to show you a little preview of what that C4D file will look like once ready. So you can use this to scale up the shoe, and we're even going to take it one step further in a little bit and set up a moving background so we can better composite everything. But for now, I'm just going to scale everything up, load in all of the textures that again I saved from my part 1. Should also mention I'm using Cinema 4D Octane to be able to view this. It's definitely an essential plugin for C4D in my opinion. So now that we've loaded in the texture maps for the shoe, we're going to change this track solid. We're actually going to change it into a shadow catcher object. So instead of having this bright pink plane in our scene, all we have to do is go to Create, Shader, and create a new Cinema 4D material. Scroll down to the Common tab and just check on Shadow Catcher. And now you're going to see all the plane is doing is just creating these realistic shadows for our shoe. So I'll scale the plane up a tiny bit more just so those shadows are a bit more spread out. And I love how that's looking already. If you guys want to see your moving footage in the background of Octane to better composite, all you have to do is create a new background object in C4D and then create a new Cinema 4D Octane material, load an image texture into the diffuse, and then for the file for that image texture, just load in the actual plate footage that we brought in from After Effects at the very start. Click over to the animation tab. You can fill in the frame rate as well as the total number of frames, which should already be in this little bottom square right here. You may also need to go into your Octane settings and just make sure alpha channel is checked on and keep environment is checked off. Our shoe is now tracked into our scene. If I wanted to, I could just fire up the render from here, but we're not tracking in a normal looking shoe, we're tracking in a sci-fi shoe. So let's go ahead and add some interesting sci-fi elements like our graphics card to our shoe, and we're going to do some basic modeling to just make the shoe look a bit more cool. So I'm actually going to open up my shoe model into Blender and do some modifications in there. You could of course just do it all in C4D. I prefer doing modeling in Blender because I am still very much new with it. You could probably tell by my final result.
Look at that hack job!
But besides the fact, I'm going to just tell you some basics for adding on to this, and you can browse through any of the thousands of Blender modeling tutorials that exist on the internet if you really want to deep dive into this. In object mode, if you click Shift A to add, we're going to just add a cube. I position that cube in front of anything I like to modify or make more 3D, such as the Nike logo. So I just scaled that down. And then I switched over to edit mode by clicking tab, and I would just select one face of the cube, click E to extrude it, click G to move it and try and line it up with the Nike logo, and then keep repeating those steps. So again, I'd click E. If you need to, after clicking E, you can click S to scale that down and make it a little bit more accurate to the shape, and then again G to place it. In the top left, you can switch from selecting faces to selecting vertices if you need to change things specifically. I kept it very basic. Here's a little time lapse of me going through and shaping this cube to my Nike logo. Again, if you guys need help with that, I will leave some very useful videos that I used in the description. So once I had this basic Nike logo kind of extruding from my original model, all I really did was go to my materials and created a simple little emissive material and toss that on the logo just to see what it would look like. To be able to actually see the emissive logo glowing, go to your output settings in Blender and make sure bloom is enabled. I'm going to do all of the material shading, etc. once we bring this back into C4D. I just wanted to do a little test and again, use this free Blender software to do some basic modeling. So now let's drag in some more cool accessories such as the graphics card, which again, I talked about at the beginning. Just download from the link I provided. Once you do import something like this, it's going to be a ton of different objects. So to connect those into one movable object that you can control to move the whole graphics card, in object mode, just click Shift A and create an empty null object, and then select all of the objects of the graphics card and select the null object last, and just click Control P to parent. I just double clicked on that null and renamed it to graphics card control, and then I used that null to position the graphics card wherever I wanted, in my case on the side of the shoe. I also added these little kit bash wires here. I'll leave a link to those below. If you just look up free wires, you can find those and add any other accessories or kit bash sci-fi parts to pimp this out and make the look of it look a lot more smooth. I also added a simple little rotation keyframe onto the fan just to make it spin. Very easy. Once I had my graphics card onto my shoe, I used the exact same trick I did to make an ugly version of the Nike logo by going into edit mode, selecting the side of the graphics card and just clicking E to extrude them. And I just did that over and over until I had this little extrusion going around the side of the shoe. Again, just doing some more extruding and trying to make this sort of metal strap looking thing going around the geometry here. I also added another cube and just started extruding that again to create the sort of upper strap where the Air Jordan logo is. Very simple. I didn't even make it wrap around the entire other side of the shoe because I knew it wasn't going to be showing. So you guys can call me lazy in that sense, but this works fine for me. We have some basic geometry making the shoe look a bit more sci-fi. So this is perfect. I'm going to file and export this FBX from Blender and bring it back into Cinema 4D. So back in C4D, we are going to bring in the sci-fi shoe, and I'm just going to roughly try to copy the positioning and size to get this lined up with my placeholder shoe. Now we can create different materials and shaders for the metallic sci-fi parts. Also keep in mind here, whenever you add this emission onto your logo, it's going to make all the shadows on your shadow catcher go all crazy. So just make sure you uncheck show on diffuse for that emission texture so that it's not affecting the shadows. Again, I'm using C4D Octane to do this, so I'm just going to create a new Octane material, change it to metallic, and just mess with the roughness and change the color for the specular. If that sounds like a bunch of mumbo jumbo, depending on how you're doing this, again, for whatever workflow, just look up how to make metallic texture for Blender or for Maya, for 3ds Max. It's all really the same, just changing around your specular, your roughness. I think I even added in this little metal scratches texture from polyhaven.com just to add a bit more realism. To make those show up, I just changed the UV transform and the projection, just mess with the scaling. And now my shoe kind of looks like Iron Man would be wearing it, so that's pretty cool. And then for the strap part, I made it more silver metallic, and in the specular, I loaded in an image texture of a PNG of the Air Jordan logo that I just saved from the internet. You just click on UV transform or projection buttons here in the image texture. You can just mess with those sliders until it's positioned the way that you like it. And that's really about it for customizing the look of the shoe. Now I did add a tiny bit of animation to the shoe, mainly just changing the color of the logo. I wanted it to match up with the way the hue cycle was being circled on the phone here. So what I did was just look at an image of a hue cycle, and whenever the thumb in front of the screen got to that part of the hue cycle, I would just add little keyframes in my emission texture for the logo so that it would cycle from that color to the next color to the next color and so on. That way, whenever we lined it back up in After Effects, it would look like the hue cycle on the phone was controlling the hue and color of the logo. I also made it so that when they clicked in the top right corner of the phone, there would be a little bit of animation for the parts on the shoe. Very easy. I think I just took the logo and just made little keyframes so it would just float forward. And then for the strap, added a little rotation keyframe so that the strap would sort of cock back whenever that button was hit. And of course, we're going to have to do all the screen replacement and UI design for the phone later on within After Effects. I also put in some Octane lights and tried to position them sort of where these windows in my actual footage were. It's not perfectly aligned, but it should get the job done. And I just sort of changed those around to get different shadows here. All right, guys, and that's about it. Here's a quick look at my render settings for those of you who are interested in how I go about setting that all up. I like to change to path tracing as opposed to direct light, and the golden rule here for faster renders, make sure you have a low sample size. I think only other thing I changed, GI clamp to 8, caustics blurring, added a tiny bit of that. To compensate for the low sample size, what you want to do is right click on your Octane camera, go to Cinema 4D tag and add an Octane camera tag, then go over to camera imager, make sure that's checked on. Of course, if you want glow, you can go over to post processing, bump that up. Once you have that camera imager on, it's very important you go up to your main render settings, and under the Octane render tab, you check on use denoise beauty pass. So once you're ready and happy with your results, go ahead and fire up the render. So once that has rendered out, so right click in your project bin in After Effects and click import multiple files. Navigate to the folder that you set up in C4D or wherever you rendered out the frames of your futuristic shoe. Select the first frame, input as sequence, click OK, and click OK again. For some reason, whenever After Effects imports these image sequence, it puts the default frame rate at 30 frames per second. I shot my footage at 24 frames per second. So what I'm going to do is just right click on the image sequence and interpret main, and we're going to change the frame rate to 23.976, or again, whatever frame rate your footage was shot at. And once you drag that image sequence over top of your footage, it should line up perfectly because we did all the tracking and it should look great. If you need to, you can add a simple little mask if the shadow catching object is interfering with other things, and just keyframe the mask with some feather. It should look fine. So now we're going to work with our screen replacement and adding in our little hue cycle UI for the phone. So what I did initially was add a key light effect onto our footage and just click on the green to remove the green from the phone. Now everything looks super ugly and grainy, so what I did in the key light was just go down to the screen mat and change around the clip black and the clip white. If you need to, you can change the color channels to alpha to see this better. You want to make that silhouette as possible, or you can just eyeball it in RGB. Now there's still a lot of grainy artifacts on the outside of the phone as well as on the hand. Another thing I did was select the layer with the key light, click Ctrl D to duplicate it. On the bottom duplication, I turned off the key light and I just made it alpha track matte, the top duplication. And the combination of doing that and playing around with your key light settings on the top layer, such as raising the screen balance, maybe adding a tiny bit of blur to the screen, you should be able to get a good result. So now that we've keyed out the green, let's actually set up the phone user interface. So I started off by tracking the motion of the phone. For the tracking, I just used the Mocha After Effects plugin that comes included within After Effects. I just clicked Start Mocha, and it's very simple. You just draw these little anchor points around your phone and then click Track Forward. Once you've done that, you can click to create your tracking data. And there's a lot you can really do with this. So once we have that tracking data, I actually grabbed the same hue cycle I was looking at as a reference whenever I was animating the color cycle in C4D. I just dropped that into Photoshop and just deleted the background and saved it as a PNG. Dragged that into After Effects and right-clicked on it and pre-composed it. And then in that pre-comp, I just created a simple little user interface, which literally consists of just me right-clicking and creating a dark solid as a background layer, and then throwing in some text and a shape layer for a little play button in the top right. Of course, you guys can go more in depth with that if you really want, but there is my simple UI. Now there's a cool little thing you can do with Mocha to actually paste an image onto your tracking data. You just need to make sure the anchor points for your UI layer and your normal footage are exactly the same. So I'm just going to copy and paste the anchor points in from there. And then on your footage with the Mocha effect, just go up to export option, corner pin, support motion blur, layer export, select screen UI, and then click apply export. That way you should have your screen UI linked up with our tracking data. So then what I did to actually have it in the screen, I just dragged the screen UI layer beneath our normal footage. Again, we already key lighted it out, so that area should just be transparent. And then I just did a little bit of scaling so that it would look like that layer is in the phone. There were some parts where the track messed up, especially where the thumb was going past some of the track points. So what I did was just select all of the layers in my main composition, pre-composed them into one, and I just created a little After Effects camera and used some keyframes to zoom in and out of the shoe so that it would cover up some parts where the screen was shifting or messing up. To make it look like a camera zooming in and out, I also used a camera lens blur effect and keyframed that so that it would go from nothing to blurry. And that is really about it, guys. I brought that After Effects comp into Premiere with a dynamic link and just did some color correction and slapped a LUT on there for the final look. So slap a like on the video, comment below if you'd like to see a part 2 on either the augmented reality shoes, taking this 3D model that we have here and making it pop onto your foot whenever you point your camera at it, or we can talk about doing some more things with different fashion, maybe clothing, mixing in Marvelous Designer. I made a similar tutorial talking about that in the past. Comment what you think about the future of technology, NFTs, all of that. Give me all your knowledge down below and I'll be responding to some of you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting, and I'll see you in the next one.